Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today I have another deck profile for you for the post-rotation format. This time we're going to be talking about Feraligatr, which is the deck that won the only major event so far in the post-rotation format, the 5,000 Player Champions League in Japan. And that build did play Melodic as well. I may make a video on Feraligatr with Melodic separately. This is a build without Melodic. I do consider, they have slightly different matchup spreads, obviously, because the Melodic is there to aid in certain matchups, but I wanted to get a deck profile out there for just Feraligatr as a deck on its own without, the techie, thick 2-2 Melodic line, and just sort of establish this is a lot more consistent, a lot more streamlined, and a much better place to start with Feraligatr. And then if you feel like you need the Melodic for certain matchups, maybe add it afterwards, but I think especially if you haven't played Feraligatr up to now, I think it is better to start with this build. It's more consistent. It does what it wants to do more often, and it'll be better for getting the ropes down, the fundamentals of Feraligatr, and will still be very well positioned as long as you don't hit the matchups that you really wanted the Melodic for, which really is not many matchups. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get right into the list itself. So, Pokemon play a 4-3-3 Feraligatr line. So, I'll talk about sort of all of these attacks, because obviously we're going to be using all of them thanks to that Relicanth that lets us attack with our previous evolutions. But the core of the deck is this Feraligatr with its Torrential Heart ability. Once during your turn, you may put 5 damage counters on this Pokemon. If you do, Pokemon's attacks are boosted by 120 damage on that turn to your opponent's active. So this allows you to either take big knockouts with Giant Wave, 160, boosted up to 280, or you can reverse thrust for 150, and play it sort of like a hit and run deck, going into Mimikyu, which your opponent cannot easily knock out. Or you can use this to do big damage, big bites, trap something in the active spot that your opponent doesn't want there, while you sort of just pin it down. A lot of time, then you won't even necessarily want to use a big bite with boosted damage. You'll sort of big bite for 10 here and there, and then you'll use the Torrential Hearts to put damage on your board that you can move off with Munkidori onto your opponent's bench Pokemon while trapping something useless in the active spot. So this deck has three completely different lines that I can take to win games, and often you'll, obviously use, sort of switch between these attacks throughout each game, but that can take big knockouts, it can hit and run into walls that are difficult for your opponent to deal with, or it can retreat lock, all while getting this little bit of damage onto your board with Torrential Hearts. That way you can move it all onto whatever you want with Munkidoris and get a bunch of extra damage in there, and sort of just pick off multiple Pokemon at once for multi-prize turns. It also allows you to not take your prizes right away, sort of put things just short of a knockout and then finish them off with Adrenaline Brain later. That way Ionos don't hit you as hard, or your own Ionos draw you more cards. And so yeah, it just has a lot of options, a lot of versatility, and it offers 3 different game plans that cover, a slew of different matchups. So we are playing 3 copies of Munkidori. We never want to prize one. We pretty much want to set up 2 every game. And most games we can also set up 3 and just sort of get triple Adrenaline Brain going. If we have like 3 Munkidori, 2 Feraligatr, and Relicanth in play, that's like our dream setup if we're not playing a matchup where we want to wall out with Mimikyu. Allows us to have, the Feraligatr attacking, and then 2 Feraligatrs allows us to put 100 damage on our board every turn to move off with Munkidori. Obviously, we'll leave 10, but, 90 extra damage a turn for Munkidoris spread out, spread out in a way that we want is incredibly powerful. And then, of course, we do play 2 copies of that Relicanth because we need to have Relicanth out every game. We can't afford to prize it. It allows us to copy Croconaw and Totodile with the Feraligatr. And then 2 copies of Mimikyu. Our wall, you can play the Melodic as well, and that gives you another walling option. But in this build, it's just the Mimikyus. It walls out, a lot of things. Can't be damaged by EXs. Pokemon V is obviously not relevant anymore. But most decks are very EX reliant right now and only have a few ways to knock this out. With Luxurious Cape boosting up to 170 HP, it becomes even more difficult to knock out, and with the Munkidoris, we can, if they don't knock it out in one hit, we can go ahead and heal a bunch of that damage off if they're trying to two-shot it. If the Mimikyu is in the active spot, we also do play Luminous Energy, so we don't have to always, Feraligatr reverse thrust into a Mimikyu and keep finding ways to get Mimikyu into the active spot. We can also just attack with Ghost Eye and put some damage counters on our opponent's active Pokemon while walling them out, and doing damage to their board with the Genebrain. So that's going to be, sort of a big part of that plan as well, is you're not always just trying to hit and run forever, keep bringing the Feraligatr up and using reverse thrust. If you can get, a Beach Court in play and keep it there, that is obviously a good strategy. You can do 150 damage with reverse thrust a turn instead of the 70 damage from Ghost Eye, but you're pretty content also to just have 2 Feraligatr on the bench, use your Torrential Hearts, use Adrenabrains to move damage off of those Feraligatrs, and then wall them out with Mimikyu and attack with Ghost Eye at the end of the turn. Supporter cards for Arven, just very key to our setup, finds us, our whatever item we need. We are very reliant on both, our Pokemon search cards, namely Precious Trolley, and then our Luxurious Capes, and our Evo TMs to set up. 4 copies of Iono. Like I said, we're trying to sort of take multiple knockouts at once towards the end of the game, so for Iono is going to be... Iono's pretty much always going to draw us a good number of cards. We might take 1 or 2 prize cards along the way, but it's going to be pretty difficult for our opponent to Iono us to a low hand size, because we get to sort of choose when we take our knockouts. And, of course, our strategy is very disruptive based. We are trying to use Munkidoris to knock out important support Pokemon on our opponent's side. We're retreat locking them. We're putting up walls. So having a consistent disruption on your opponent's side makes it much more difficult for them to deal with all of your defensive tools. 3 copies of Lana's Aid. This allows us to put 3 in any combination of Pokemon and Basic Energy, of non-rule box Pokemon and Basic Energy cards from the discard pile into our hand. This is just sort of the best recovery card. We can afford to play, to take a turn to Lana's Aid pretty often throughout the game, and obviously our Feraligatr line, if we're attacking with a Feraligatr, for example, that's 3 Pokemon and 2 Water Energy going into the discard pile, or if our opponent knocks out Munkidori, Lana's Aid just gets those right back to her hand. Night Stretcher is not really enough. We want that extra bit of recovery, and like I said, we can, the games are really, really long with this deck, depending on the strategy you're going for, but typically, when you're playing a very defensive strategy, the games are going to be pretty long, and you're going to play a lot of supporters over the course of the game, so you're going to have time to play a couple of Lana's Aids and just make sure that you can sustain your board. 1 copy of Professor's Research, just an additional draw supporter to make sure that we, set up throughout the game, refresh our hand, or dig for exactly what we need in the late game. 1 copy of Buzzorders, we do play a heavy counter catcher count in this deck, but we want one way to, gust when we are not behind. And we can only play so many counter catcher, right? So just having more gusting in general. And then we do play 1 copy of Crispin. Since we do play both Water and Dark Energy, it's usually going to be usable, and it's mostly just to go ahead and we get our Munkidori set up. Going to be pretty useful anytime we use it. It could also allows us to set up a Feraligatr in 1 turn by Crispining a Water Energy to it and then attaching a Water that we already had in hand. But mostly is here just sort of get a free attachment onto a Munkidori. Next are item cards. 4 copies of Pokégear. We play the 1 of Crispin, the 1 of Boss, and then all of our other supporters are just really, really... It's really important that we play Iono when we want to, play Arven when we want to, and this just helps us with our early game setup in general to have more outs to that Arven for Precious Trolley. So playing the max copy of Pokégear to try to find Arven as consistently as possible in the early game. And then, of course, it's just a good card throughout, especially because our deck doesn't have any onboard draw, right? So we don't have any Pokemon that we keep on board that draw us cards like a lot of decks do. So it's more important that we have more just raw draw outs and supporters. 4 copies of Counter Catcher. We're trying to trap stuff in the active spot that is difficult for our opponent to move most of the time, or that can't attack, and then we're retreat locking it. So 4 copies of Counter Catcher to have the optimal and access to our opponent's bench possible. Really, like I said, we'd probably play more than 4 Counter Catcher if we could. It's just very, very important for us to keep trapping stuff throughout the game. 1 copy of Night Stretcher, just more recovery, just an item searchable recovery card off of the Arven if we needed it back, something that has gone down. 1 copy of Buddy-Buddy Poffin. So this is a Precious Trolley build. We are reliant on Precious Trolley to get set up, but 1 copy of Buddy-Buddy Poffin, particularly for if Precious Trolley is prized, is going to be important to make sure that we can get our Totodiles down quickly. 1 copy of Earthen Vessel just allows us to find Water and Dark off an Arven. And then that 1 copy of Precious Trolley, which we are trying to use basically every single game while we're playing for Pokégear and for Arven, allows us to, we need a lot of bench Pokemon. Most of them are not Buddy-Buddy Poffin searchable, so this just allows us to instantly go like Totodile, Munkidori, Relicanth, or, you know, Mimikyu, whatever we're missing, whatever's not in the active spot, and just sort of just immediately fill our board with everything that we need. Next, stadiums, tools, and energy. We have 2 copies of Beach Court. So this isn't something that you can play in the melodic list. It's sort of a luxury card that we get to play in this list because we have more deck space. But it is really synergistic with the Mimikyu hit and run strategy. Allows us to keep retreating that Mimikyu to the bench spot. That way we can keep using 150 damage reverse thrust by copying Croconaw and using Torrential Heart. Just allows us to do so much damage while we are walling out with Mimikyu. So any decks that have a tough time dealing with Mimikyu, or like even if they have outs to Mimikyu, but it's just sort of they're not consistent ways to deal with it, it's going to take them some time. Being able to put on so much pressure with so much damage consistently is great. And of course, most of our Pokemon, all of our basic Pokemon, have a single retreat cost anyways, so Beach Court's always going to be a nice card to find early on to switch into the attackers that we want, or keep things that we don't want to get knocked out safe. We do play 1 copy of Artazon, just as another Pokemon search card. Better than something like Nest Ball, because it also offers us the Stadium bump, and we can play it under Ichi-Pal Unlock. And then better than something like Buddy-Buddy Poffin, because we do want more ways to search out things like Munkidori and Relicanth. Also, Artazon is a stadium that quite a few decks play, so there's a lot of games where it's just going to stick around for a couple turns. We can get multiple uses out of it to find multiple Munkidoris, or, just continue to set up our board. 3 copies of Luxurious Cape. So it makes our Feraligatr really difficult to knock out. It also makes our Mimikyu really difficult to knock out. And it protects our Munkidoris from things like Torrential Pump. And our Relicanth from things like Torrential Pump. So Luxurious Cape, just very important on really any of our Pokemon, depending on the situation, to keep things out of range. That extra 100 damage is really big, and because we're trapping our opponent and sort of running them out of resources a lot, they aren't going to have a ton of ways to punish us for having Luxurious Cape down. It's usually going to be worth it, especially on something like a Mimikyu. It's like it makes it so difficult to knock out that it doesn't really matter that if they do knock it out, they're going to take an extra prize card. You'd rather, have 170 HP Mimikyu than make them go through 370 HP Mimikyus, because if they don't one-shot it, then we can start Munkidoriing that damage off with Shadow Brains. 2 Technical Machine Evolution, part of the Arven Trolley combo. We just want to Arven for Trolley Evolution every game, and then go ahead and get 2 of our Croconaws out. And can't afford to have that prize. We want to use Evolution every single game. Even if we don't hit it turn 1, we're still probably going to want Evolution eventually. Even if, we can even Evolution 2 turns in a row, right? Like if we get our Croconaws out and the next turn just like still have Mimikyu active or something like that, and just go Evo again into our Feraligatrs. 4 copies of Water Energy and 3 copies of Darkness Energy. We really don't need that many Water Energy to attack with Feraligatr. We only need 2 energy for Feraligatr's attack itself. Both Totodile and Croconaw only need 1, and most of our Pokemon only have 1 retreat cost, so we don't need a ton of energy to retreat into Feraligatr either. Those 4 waters are typically going to be enough to set up our attacks, and especially with the triple Lana's Aid and the Night Stretcher as recovery. And of course we do have 2 Luminous Energy as well if we need more. But we are playing the 3 Dark Energy, allows us to potentially set up 3 Munkidoris with those Dark Energies. In combination with the Luminous, we'll pretty much always have enough to set up the, all of the Munkidoris that we're able to get in play. And of course, especially in combination with Lana's Aid and Night Stretcher. But the Luminous Energies allow us to, have that. Of course, they aren't as synergistic with Lana's Aid, Crispin, Night Stretcher. However, they give us a couple of very important energy cards to have for attacking with Mimikyu. We don't really want to play basic Psychic Energy because attacking Mimikyu isn't always a part of our key game plan, but it's nice to have those 2 copies of Luminous Energy for games where we do want to attack with Mimikyu. And then, of course, the versatility of being able to put it on Feraligatr or Munkidori is very crucial as well. And it even opens up a potential attack with something like Relicanth if we if we really, really wanted to. Alright, into the matchups though, we have our favorable matchups first. Raging Bolt, we can trade very efficiently with them with Feraligatr if we need to, and they also don't really play many, if any, switching cards right now, so Big Bite, locking, something in the active, like a Noctowl, is going to be a very, very easy way to win the game. We should pretty much always be able to just retreat lock Raging Bolt out of the game, similar to the way that Snorlax would, and then of course we're going to get to take prize cards while we do it with those Adrenabrain Torrential Pumps combo. Charizard EX, same idea. They do have one Turo usually, but we should be able to pretty consistently just retreat lock them out of the game with Big Bite. You know, we don't have a great way to one-shot a Charizard EX, but with some, as long as we can set up some Munkidoris, we can get the Feraligatr damage up there with two Adrenabrains and the Torrential Heart to boost the damage on Great Wave. And we can one-shot Pidgeot EX really easily, which is also a big plus in the matchup. They also don't have great ways to deal with Mimikyu, so they have Rotom, but it only does 70, and then we can go ahead and Luxurious Escape around it. Same with the Raging Bolt. They at least have Slitherwing, but they're still not one-shotting the Mimikyu, which means that we can keep recovering it with Adrenabrain if we want to go for a retreat in the Mimikyu strat. Next we have End Zoroark, which has basically no ways to deal with Mimikyu outside of Darmanitan, which they need to be behind on prizes to attack with. Like, they can use the first attack, but we can just play around that by not putting, not discarding too many basic energy, recovering the ones that do hit the discard pile, and then the second attack, of course, can hit Mimikyu, but it's only doing 90, and they have to discard the reversals, so they really just don't have reasonable answers to Mimikyu at all. The Darmanitan is not going to be able to take out two Mimikyus with Luxurious Capes, maybe more if we start recovering them, if they do get through one. And then, of course, Adrenabrain, multiple Adrenabrains are just going to kill off all the damage that they do to our Mimikyus anyways. Then we have Goldango. This is mostly referring to the Dragon Bolt build, as I've mentioned in previous videos, because I think that will be the most popular build. But if it is just a straight Goldango build, Mimikyu is going to put in a lot of work. They typically don't have good options for dealing with it. They might play the Baby Goldango that I was seeing play pre-rotation, and that can hit Mimikyu for weakness. So that is, one way for them to win the game. But we have multiple other win cons. We're doing so much damage, we can one-shot Goldengos really efficiently with the Feraligatr, and we can retreat lock with Big Bite on a lot of things. Even against the Dragapult build, if they start using Phantom Dive, we can sort of wall that out with Mimikyu as well, force them to attack with a Dracloak, which is really the only answer that build ever has to Mimikyu. And Dracloak is not going to be enough to deal with Mimikyu plus Munkidoris. So that matchup is going to be pretty favorable. And again, it's just even if none of our wall strategies work, this is a matchup where Feraligatr can trade really efficiently with their two prize Pokemon. Even matchups, we have Terrabox, so Mimikyu puts in some work in this matchup, and of course, the Retreat Lock is also a viable strat here, but they do have the one of Turo, and the biggest problem in this matchup is that, like, sometimes you have a bit of a slower start, and Torrential Pump can really do a number on you. You know, if they just, like, boss up one of your Totodiles, Torrential Pump double Totodile, if you put a Luxurious Cape on one, it's pretty easy for them to punish that with a knockout. So they have a lot of ways to take prizes quickly, and then even when you get, like, the Mimikyu up, if they're not retreat locked, they can still just, like, Torrential Pump around your Mimikyu and start picking off your Munkidoris. And then once your Munkidoris are gone, if you don't have a lot of Munkidoris in play, and they, like, Iono you, then they can start attacking your Mimikyu with Fan Rotom, and you might not have the resources to heal that damage off. So I'd say that generally, because you have, like, the retreat lock route and the Mimikyu wall route, this is not a bad matchup. If you set up well and get like a strong board established, there's not a ton they can do. But sometimes they just take like a 4-prize lead before you really get attacking with Torrential Pumps, and then you find yourself in a spot where they really just need to, like, Turo out of the retreat lock once, or find, a couple of key gusting cards in order to seal up the game. So it's really just about how well you set up, honestly, in this matchup. Then we have Gardevoir EX, which I consider another even matchup. It's definitely, you don't have, like, a ton of great options against Gardy, but they can't really use their single prize attackers effectively against you, because you can set up multiple Adrenabrains and just take free prizes on them. They can't just wall you out with a Gardevoir EX, because with Adrenabrains and Torrential Heart you can one-shot it. And they are limited in what support Pokemon they can actually bench because of the Retreat Lock potential. Now, the problem here is that they have their own Adrenabrains, they have Screamtail. They can definitely, if they set up fast, then they can use that to go ahead and just start picking off your important Pokemon, picking off your Munkidoris. You know, maybe going for like a counter catcher on your Relicanth and Ionoing you to a low hand size if you take the prize lead, because they have a slower start. And then they're in a position where your Relicanth is in the active, you might not draw off of Iono a way to get it out of the active immediately, and then they can, sort of just Screamtail around it for a couple turns while also applying some Adrenabrain pressure to your bench. So their ability to sort of pick off a lot of your support Pokemon at key times and disrupt you can be pretty problematic. You're not tanking stuff. Like they can, even with a Luxurious Cape for Feraligatr, they still have ways to take a Feraligatr. So the matchup it's very close. I'd say that like most of the time you should be all right, but they definitely have options to sort of pick on your setup and sort of bully you for being a deck that requires a lot of support Pokemon to remain in play to function at its best. Then we have unfavorable matchups. Dragapult, Dusknoir. So this is the biggest reason that people play the 2/2 Melodic in the deck sometimes, right? The Dragapult matchup. Dragapult's a fairly popular deck. And with the Dusknoir, it becomes much, much harder to deal with than something like the Goldengo build, since they can deal with your Mimikyus very effectively. They can sort of Curse Blast them. Even if it has a Luxurious Cape on it, they can just counter catcher around it after using the Dusknoir, and then go ahead and Phantom Dive, knock it out on the bench. The other thing is that they make you take prize cards with the Curse Blast, which means their Ionos are actually going to do numbers against you. And of course, if they get set up really quickly, Phantom Dive can pick apart your board while you are still in the setup phase very effectively, especially if they play something like Hawlucha, or they pull off something like a Dusclops. And, if they go second and just issue pollen you and you don't sort of get established with that trolley right away, you might just have trouble setting up in general. So there's just a lot of ways that they can sort of bully your board, and sort of the same way that Terrabox and Guardy are able to, but your win conditions are much more clear against Terrabox and Guardy. They don't have good options for dealing, Terrabox doesn't have good options for dealing with Mimikyu or Retreat Lock, and Gardevoir can be really weak against decks that have their own, like multiple of their own Munkidoris. However, the Dragapult Dusknoir build, on the other hand, can pretty consistently avoid benching a lot of like retreat lockable liabilities, and they might have a Turo of their own if they do go for something like a Badoo early, which puts a liability into play. And then they have so many, they have answers to your Mimikyu, so that's not really a viable option either. You're not going to be effectively like one-shotting Dragapults consistently, like you can at some point in the game with the Torrential Heart Munkidori combo, but they're going to be trying to pick off your Munkidoris with their bosses, bringing up the Munkidoris and just taking them away to reduce your outs to Adrenabrain. So just a number of ways that they can disrupt you and target your board, make the matchup fairly difficult. Definitely winnable, but not a matchup you want to see, and that is why if you do expect to play against a lot of Dragapult, then you start considering adding the 2/2 Melodic to the deck. Next, we have our Archaludon EX. So this is a deck that can't really be retreat locked most of the time. There's a lot of different builds of our Archaludon EX right now. There's like the Poison build, and then there's like the build with Double, and then there's just the traditional, just no text, just Archaludon with a bunch of Turos. And there's also the Scissor build of the deck. So there's a lot of different things that Archaludon could be, but none of them are particularly good for us. The Poison build can take a few prize cards against us really early and has great answers to Mimikyu. They all, almost all have at least one Turo usually, and probably a PAL pad. So Retreat Lock is not a viable strat here. They can also attack with the regular Duraludon through our Mimikyus. And we do need Adrenabrains to knock out the Archaludons. Which is realistically our most viable strat, is just to like trade with the Archaludons. But even then, they're usually going to take the first few prize cards, so we're trading efficiently when we can get our Feraligatr set up, but we're not great at setting up like multiple big Feraligatr attacks in a row. And they might play things like Jamming Tower to get around to get around the Luxurious Cape. So there's a lot of things that go wrong for us in this matchup. They have a lot of options. Scizor is really annoying for us to deal with too. That's just a card that can sort of sweep our whole deck. Multiple Scizors, not really a good way to deal with that. So no matter what build they're playing, they just have a lot of ways to give us trouble. Next we have Walls, another matchup where this is a matchup where we just sort of get out-walled, right? Like, they play multiple Cornerstone EX and Munkidoris of their own. You know, we can sort of try to pick on their Munkidoris, but a lot of times they'll have ways to scoop those up, or they can just not bench them and just sort of go with Cornerstones. Our best line here is if they open something like Feebas or Girafarig and they don't play a way to scoop that up, we can trap that in the active spot and then with Retreat Lock and then use Munkidoris to try to kill their Cornerstones. But if they do play their own Munkidoris, they can counter the Munkidoris that we're putting on their Cornerstones. We only play one boss, so it's not going to be easy for us to pick off their Munkidoris if they do come down. And if we're just trying to Retreat Lock for a Giraffe or a Melodic, then they will be able to still swing into our Feraligatr, and we'll have to find ways, you know, to keep getting new Feraligatrs or keeping our Feraligatr alive with Munkidoris. So most of the time, they can just set up 2 Cornerstone against us, and there's really not much that we can do about it. Our Adrenabrains are not going to take down 2 Cornerstone with Pokevital and some of their own Adrenabrains before they can take 6 prize cards against us, and that's just, unfortunately, how the matchup tends to go. But that's it. Those are all of the matchups I have to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I think Feraligatr is a super cool deck. I think that it's fairly well positioned. Right now, I like not having the 2/2 Melodic in there. I think that Dragapult, well, it probably will be one of the most popular decks. It's sort of one bad matchup in a sea of decks that can be a lot shakier if you don't build your deck consistently. The Melodic also can help against Terrabox as well. Sometimes against Charizard, but Terrabox and Charizard are, at least Charizard is not a matchup that I'm worried about anyways. In Terrabox, I think that your Retreat Lock, Mimikyu Wincons are just as good as the Melodic potential Wincon. So I'd rather just be a consistent deck, especially early format. I don't like playing super teched out lists that are not streamlined. Obviously, for like a major event like the Champions League, it makes more sense that they would have a bit more techie lists. But I think that the meta is super diverse, that even with Dragapult being one of the most popular decks, it's still not like you're going to play against Dragapult multiple times a tournament, very likely. Like, you might hit 2 Dragapult in the tournament, but for the most part, you're going to hit, like, a lot of different decks. There's a lot of different viable decks right now that you could be playing against. And everybody wants to try the new toys. Dragapult's been dominating for months, and some people will stick with that, but most players want to try out something new, want to try out some of these new post-rotation decks. And I think that it's better for now to just play just Precious Trolley Evo every game, consistently get set up, play your thick Feraligatr line, have those Beach Courts as options to do more hit and run strats with Mimikyu, and then, you know, maybe later down the line, if Dragapult reestablishes itself as like de facto best deck, you know, 18% of the metagame, then we'll go ahead and throw that 2/2 Melodic back into Feraligatr. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to check out any of my content or my socials, my link tree is in the description below. Have a great day.